Baruch Hashem, today's daf yomi is Chullin Lamed Daled, Chullin 34, but we're going to start on the bottom of Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, bottom of 33b, around 11 lines from the bottom. That the Mishnah had said, in the previous Mishnah had said that if a person, we're bottom of 33b, 11 lines from the bottom. Mishnah said that if a person is slaughters an animal and there's no blood, that the blood does not make the animal kosher l'kabel tuma. That you can even slaughter the animal with hands that are sheni l'tuma, second degree tuma, which would have made the meat third degree tuma. But since there's no blood, it doesn't make it. So the Gemara says, wait, third degree tuma. We assume that we're talking about Chullin, but there is no Chullin by third degree Tumah. So therefore, the Gemara gave two answers to this scenario yesterday, and to this difficulty yesterday. In today's daf, the Gemara gives a third answer. The third answer to this question says the Gemara is from Rabbi Elazar. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Elishaya, that what's our Mishnah referring to? Why are we concerned about Chullin becoming Tameh? We're on the bottom of 33a, 11 lines from the bottom. So says Rebbe Elazar, Nim Rebbe Shaya, we're talking about Chullin Shenasu al Taras HaKodesh Askinon. The Chullin in the Mishnah, the Mishnah is talking about Chullin, but it's talking about Chullin that was done al Taras HaKodesh, meaning to say the people, the Kohanim eating that Chullin, were eating it as though it was kachim, and so therefore it could become Tumah. Rashi explains, why would a person take their Chullin and eat it as though it's kachim? A person who was accustomed to eating kachim, and so therefore he wants to become even more accustomed to it, and so therefore he keeps his chullin also from becoming some tamei if it would be kachim. So such a person, that's what the Mishnah is referring to. Chullin shenasu al taras hakodesh, and that could become therefore a shlishi l'tumah. So the Gemara says, Udalok Rabbi Yoshua, and this position is not like Rabbi Yoshua, because Rabbi Yoshua does not say Chulin Shenas Al Taras HaKodesh can become a Shlishi L'Tumah. But as we'll see in the Brisa, Rabbi Eliezer does say that. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer. The Brisa says, Rabbi Eliezer says, Ha'ochel Ochel Rishon, if a person eats food that's Tameh, and it's a Rishon L'Tumah, so then he can become himself a Rishon L'Tumah. He becomes a Rishon Tumah. If he eats food that's a Sheni Tumah, if he eats food that's a second degree Tumah, he becomes a Sheni. If he eats food that's a Shlishi, he becomes a Shlishi. Whereas Rabbi Yoshua says, Ochel Rishon, Sheni, that if he eats food that's a first degree Tumah, he becomes a Sheni Tumah. Not a first degree Tumah, but it goes down one level, it becomes a second degree. If he eats Sheni, he remains a Sheni. And Shlishi, and interestingly, if he eats food that's a third degree Tumah, he becomes a Sheni Kodesh. It became a second degree Tumah in that he can make Kachim Tameh as third degree Tumah. They ain't Sheni with Truma, but he does not become a Sheni for Truma. He cannot make Truma into a third degree. And what are we talking about here? And it says Rabbi Yoshua that we're talking about in all of these cases, we're talking about the Chullin Shenas Al Taras Truma. That it's talking about a person who accepted upon himself to eat the chullin as though it was truma. And so therefore, if he touched the sheni l'tumah, it's going to become a shlishi l'tumah. Anyway, we see from here, that Rabbi Yeshua is of the position, says the Gemara, that Taras HaTruma in Al Taras HaKodesh Lo, that Rabbi Yeshua does not say that there's this concept of Chulin Shenas Al Taras HaKodesh can make something a third degree, can be a Shlishi L'Tumah, so he doesn't hold from it. So therefore, when Rabbi Elazar says our Mishnah is referring to Chulin Shenas Al Taras HaKodesh, it must not be like Rabbi Yeshua. Kasavar Chulin Shenas Al Taras HaKodesh Leish Shlishi. He must be in the position that if you accepted upon yourself to eat Chulin as though it's Kachim, it cannot become a Shlishi L'Tumah. So the Gemara says, well, why doesn't Rebbe Elazar, instead of saying it's not like Rabbi Yeshua, Why doesn't he say the lukma on the top of Lamed Daled Amud Aleph? Why doesn't he just say it's chulin shenatzal taras truma? That our Mishnah, which talks about chulin capable of becoming tamei from hands, which would make it a shlishi l'tuma. Why don't we just say it's by chulin that was eaten as though it was truma? And that would be capable of being a shlishi l'tuma. The Rabbi Yeshua, and then it would go according to the position of Rabbi Yeshua. Where it says, no, we don't want to assume that. Why? Because our Mishnah is obviously referring to meat, because you're slaughtering an animal. And the Ibit Truma, Basar Miika. If it would be referring to Truma, there's no meat that's Truma. Truma refers to grain products or something that grows from the ground, but clearly not to meat. So therefore, our Mishnah is clearly not talking about people who are chulin shenatzal taras truma. So Gemara says, so you mean to say our Mishnah is referring to kachim, people who took upon themselves to eat kachim, and they were worried that the meat would get mixed up with kachim, alamai bekachim, b'chaya bekachim miika. But our Mishnah refers to basar chaya va'of. Meat, chaya is an undomesticated animal. You can't have such an animal as a carbon. There is no kachim. There's no deer that's a kachim. There's no gazelle that's kachim. It's clearly not kachim. So the Gemara says, yeah, even though it couldn't be kachim, basar b'basar milchaf, basar b'perilo milchaf. You could imagine a scenario where if you're not careful about eating bison, let's say, you come to mix it up with your sheep, but you're not going to mix up your olives with your meat. And so therefore we're not worried about truma, but we are worried about mixing up the meat with the chulin shenatzal taras hakodesh. So now Ula comes along, and let's analyze this statement of Rebbe Lazar vis-a-vis Rebbe Yeshua. Amar Ula chavraya amrin bechulin shenatzal taras hakodesh. Our chavraya, meaning our colleagues, they said that our Mishnah, the Mishnah on Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, is in fact referring to chulin shenatzal taras hakodesh udalok Rabbi Yeshua. They say like the answer of Rebbe Lazar in our Mishnah, where it talks about you could cut the carbon, you could touch the meat with hands that are not washed. That's referring to chulin shenatzal taras hakodesh, and not like Rabbi Yeshua, who doesn't hold from chulin shenatzal taras hakodesh, can become a shlishi. Va'ana amina, but I say, says Ula, remember this position of Ula, that it could even be Rabbi Yeshua, that it could even be the position of Rabbi Yeshua, who said, our Mishnah could even be consistent with Rabbi Yeshua. V'lomi ba'ikamer, when Rabbi Yeshua argues with Rabbi Eliezer, he wasn't saying that I don't think that there could be shlishi l'chulin shenatzal taras hakodesh. He's saying lomi ba'achulin shenatzal taras hakodesh techamir. He's saying just the opposite. Not only chulin shenatzal taras hakodesh, because it's so more severe than truma, so there is a shlishi for truma. Nami is shlishi. He says, I even say that there could be a shlishi on chulin shenatzal taras truma, and so therefore Ula says our Mishnah could even be consistent with Rabbi Yeshua. So the Gemara says, who are these chavraya who say our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yeshua? Man chavraya. Who is these colleagues who say it's not like Rabbi Yeshua? Well, that's Rabbi Bar Chana. That's the position of Rabbi Bar Chana. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. The Rabbi Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and he discussed this dispute in the Mishnah and Taharos between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. He said, what was the back and forth between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua? How do we fill in the context? Maya Hadri, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, how do they have this dialogue? Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yeshua, how can you say that if you eat a rishon, you become a sheni? Motzinu ochel chamor min ha, it should be machal. We know that the one who eats the food is actually more severe than the food itself. How do we know that? So therefore, it makes sense what I say, that the rishon becomes a rishon, and now, like you said, the rishon becomes a sheni, that he goes down a level. Because let's say you have a kosher bird, but it was a carcass, bachutz and lo metame. that if you touch it on externally, it doesn't transmit tumah. A dead bird does not transmit tumah by touching. It makes the clothing tameh if you swallow it. So b'chutz lo mitama v'yu ocha, but if you swallow it, mitame begadim abeis abliya. And while you're swallowing, it makes the garments tameh. So therefore, the one who eats becomes more tameh than the food item on its own. So therefore, I also say that it's going to be the same level of tumah as the food item itself. So if you eat a rishon, you become a rishon. Whereas Rabbi Yoshua says, don't bring me a proof from the velos of tahor, from the carcass of a kosher bird, the chidushu, because that's an unusual law. It's a one-off. It's a chidush. It's not like anything else. And so therefore you can't prove from that to these laws over here. So Ella says, Rabbi Yoshua, Matzinu shemachal chamor min ha'ochel. It says, Rabbi Yoshua says back to Rabbi Eliezer, actually we find that the one who eats does become, the food item is more severe than the one who eats it. How so? Machal, because a food item imparts tumah b'kabetza if it's the size of an egg. Va'ocha, whereas the one who eats it is only tummy unless he eats half of a loaf of bread, which is twice the size of an egg. And so therefore, we find that the food item is more severe than the one who eats it. And that's why my position that the rishon becomes, the one who eats a rishon becomes a sheni, because the food item is more severe than the one who eats it. Says Rabbi Shua, so how would you make the food item like the one who eats it, like the food item itself? The Rabbi Eliezer would respond to that. You're talking about two separate things. You're talking about how much of the food is needed to transmit tumah, and I'm talking about the levels in which tumah goes down. They're not the same categories, so therefore don't bring to me one from the other. And furthermore, Rabbi Eliezer responds, even according to your logic, Sha'ata Omer, al Rishon Sheni. You say if you eat a Rishon, you become a Sheni. Yafat Omer, fine, I understand your logic. You say that the food item is more severe than the one who eats it, so if you eat a Rishon, you become a Sheni. Fine. But according to your logic, Sheni Lama. Why if you eat a second degree Tumah, do you become a Sheni? You should become a Shlishi. Amar lo, so Rabbi Yoshua responds, Matzinu sheni osa sheni ayidei mashkin. He says, no, we can have a sheni make a sheni. We have other scenarios where a sheni l'tumah makes a sheni l'tumah, and that is through mashkin, liquid. That if the food item I'll read the Rashi. Im naga ochel sheni, if food item that was a second degree tumah touched a food shamashke tofecho, which has liquid on it, nasu mashkin tchila. It makes the liquid not a second degree tumah, but a first degree tumah. Katani va'azel, as we're about to say in the Gemara, kol aposo as a truma, whatever disqualifies truma, meaning to say truma is posel from a second degree. If a sheni l'tumah makes a truma into a posel, meaning to say that that's where the tumah stops, but it itself is tamei. Mitame mashken lios tchila. It makes the liquid a rishon l'tumah. V'chazar mashke v'asa ochel sheni, and the liquid goes back and makes the food item into a second degree tumah. And so, since we find that through mashke, through a liquid, that the sheni becomes a sheni in another place, so also we're going to be strict by a person who eats it, so that he himself becomes just like the food, because his principle is eating is more strict than touching. So that's how Rabbi Yoshua responds. So Amar Los, Rabbi Lezer responds, he says, no, that case is different. The liquids themselves, they have become a rishon l'tumah. So you're not making this other item a sheni. It's only because the liquids first became a rishon. The Tanan called posel b'truma metame mashkal yoschil chutz mitfil yom. So therefore, you can't compare the case of the liquid making a food item a second degree tumah, because compared to the liquid themselves, which is a rishon tumah, and so that's why it's making the food item a second degree tumah. So the ode, and furthermore, says Rabbi Eliezer, your logic that it goes down in that it transmits to the one who eats it becomes the next level of tumah, that the rishon becomes a sheni, and you said the sheni becomes a sheni because of the case of liquids. Fine, but then how do you explain your third position where you said v'od shlishi sheni, a person who eats a shlishi l'tumah becomes a sheni? Lama. Why? Where do you get that from? So Rabbi Yeshua responds, Amar lo, afani lo amarti ela betruma shetarasa. I only said this by truma shetarasa tuma he eitzel hakodesh. He says, I only said this position that one who eats a third degree tuma becomes a sheni only by somebody who ate shlishi for chulin. But this person is eating it about taras truma. He's eating it as though it is truma, with the purity of truma, and because shetarasa truma he eitzel hakodesh, because the Chachamim made a maila for tahara, and they said that because they said Ella truma shetarasa tuma he eitzel hakodesh, that even though for chulin it is possible, but it would still be able to transmit tuma to kachim. And so therefore, it's not enough to watch it for truma. And so therefore, if a Kohen eats truma, his garments will be considered like tumas midras hazav with respect to kachim, and that it also transmits tuma. And so since the shmira said truma is not considered like a shmira with respect to kachim, so too somebody who eats it with respect to truma, a shlishi, it's going to be considered like he's a sheni, and he can transmit tuma. Look at Rashi. Klomar, hold on one second. I'll just read the Rashi's on the bottom of Lamadal Amalav. Rashi says, "Kedamrina b'chomer b'kodesh, big day ochet truma midras l'kodesh." That the person who eats the garments of somebody who eats truma could transmit truma for kodesh. So we see from here, ain't shmiras truma chashiva shmira eitzel kodesh. It's not considered like a proper watching vis-a-vis kachim. Hilkach ha'ochel sheni l'kodesh. The one who eats truma is going to be considered like he's a sheni for kachim, that because we could do a sheni ayidei mashkin. And Rashi explains, midikama Rav bar Barchana do usvei Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Yeshua shlishi sheni lama v'amar afani lamarti shma mina. We learn from here the hada katani v'milsa Rabbi Yeshua bechulin shenas al taras truma. So we see from here that the whole position of Rabbi Yeshua is chulin shenas al taras truma. So that's how we got to that position. So the Gemara says, okay, so now the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Anai, Ha'ochel shlishi shechulin shenaso al taras hakodesh. Somebody who eats the shlishi for chulin, and you're doing it as though you are taras hakodesh. You're doing it as though you're treating your body as though it's, eating it only kachim, but you eat shlishi for chulin. Nase gufo sheni lekodesh. So therefore, you can become a sheni for kachim, meaning to say you become tamei, that you can transmit tuma to make something into kachim, meaning to say even though Chulin, even though so it's the equivalent of eating somebody who eats a sheni basically can now transmit tuma to the kachim. So Eisvei Rabbi Zera. So Eisvei Rabbi Zera Rabbi Asi. So Rabbi Zera challenges this halacha that he just cited, but didn't Rabbi Yoshua say shlishi sheni lekodesh ve'in sheni letruma? That if you eat shlishi, you become a sheni vis-a-vis kachim, but you don't become a sheni to transmit truma. And what do we say we're referring to? Bechulin shenatzu al taras truma. That when do we say that you become a sheni for kachim? By chulin that you're eating as though it's truma, altaras truma in altaras hakodesh lo, meaning today it becomes a sheni if he was eating it as though it was truma, but if he was eating it as though it's taras hakodesh, he does not become a sheni for kachim. So isn't that the implication? Amarle lomi by kamar. So he says no. It means obviously it includes it, not only by chulin, not only by meaning to say. Not only by chulin shenatzol taras hakodesh, which is a shlishi utuma, so does he become a sheni? But even chulin shenatzol taras truma, which is not a severe, he also becomes a shlishi utuma like truma. So vaha afani lo amarti el b'truma kamer. But doesn't Rabbi Yeshua say I only said this by truma? So the Gemara says Amorai ninu v'aliba de Rabbi Yochanan. So this is a machokas Amorayim according to the position of Rabbi Yochanan. And according to Rabbi Bar Chana, he says that Rabbi Yochanan says that Rabbi Yeshua says that only al chulin shenatzol taras truma, whereas according to Rabbi Asi, Rabbi Yochanan says that also by chulin shenatzol taras kodesh. So now the Gemara says, Amar Ula ha'ochel shlishi shel chulin. Somebody eats a shlishi of chulin shenatzol taras truma, nifsal gufo milechol b'truma. So now, if he can't eat truma, if he would make the truma tamei, and even though he doesn't become a sheni to disqualify the truma by touching it, nevertheless he would become a shlishi for tuma, and so therefore he can't eat the truma. So the Gemara says, "My kamashwan." Why is Ula teaching us this? Isn't this already explicit? Tanina, Rabbi Yoshua said in our mission that we cited from Taharos on the bottom of Lama Gimel on the base, Shlishi Sheni LeKodesh ve'ein Sheni LeTruma. He's a Sheni if he eats the chulin, which is a Shlishi, he becomes a Sheni for Kodesh. He can make it Tame, but he doesn't become a Sheni vis-a-vis Truma. B'chulin shenatzol taras Truma. Sheni who delo have Shlishi have, meaning he's not a Sheni that he can't make the truma tummy by touching it, but he can make the truma tummy by eating it. Mara says, no, if that was the only source, I might have said he's not even a shlishi. I might have thought I did Amar Sheni B'Kodesh, Amar Nami ain't Sheni B'Truma. That since he says he's a Sheni B'Kodesh, that's why he says he's not a Sheni B'Truma. But I wouldn't have known that he's a Shlishi B'Truma. So that's what Ula is teaching us. Kamash Mulan. So Esrei Rav Hamnuna Ula. So Rav Hamnuna challenges Ula. Didn't we say in the mission Taharos, food that touched an avatuma, harishon shebechulin, and becomes a rishon of chulin, it is tamei umitame. If the food item touched, let's say, a dead body or a sheretz, it becomes a first degree tuma, so it's tamei, and it's also mitame others. And Vasheni posel, and then let's say this food item became, which was a rishon tuma, touched other food item, that which is a second degree tuma, and it touched truma, it will make the truma posel, which means that it is tamei, but it will not make it tamei, which means it could transmit it to another level. But shlishi, but let's say, third degree. Let's say chulin shenatzu ataras truma nechal ben nazid hadama, and this third degree, the shlishi l'tuma, can even be eaten with like a stew of truma mixed up in it. So we see from here, if you say somebody who's a third degree truma cannot eat the truma, how can he eat something? How can he eat this nizira dema if he himself is shlishi l'tuma? So the Gemara says, no, don't bring me an example from Amalei Hanach from nizira dema. Don't bring me a proof from this case of the stew, which has truma mixed up in it, because there's not enough truma in there, because you don't have an olive-sized amount in it for each loaf of bread. And so therefore it's not going to be a relevant case, because it's not enough of an amount there. Okay, so continue with this tomorrow, Baruch Hashem, and also Baruch Hashem, we'll continue with this beautiful sugya tomorrow. All right, Shikoya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.